Please, I just want to talk to my father. You, his daughter. Don't make me laugh. When a beggar girl crashes a billionaire's wedding, claiming to be his daughter, the glamorous bride publicly humiliates and beats her, unaware the girl is not only telling the truth, but holds the key to expose conspiracy of kidnapping, murder, and betrayal that will shatter everything. In the grand estate of Mr. Adabio Andrews, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth in Logos, life was measured in moments of joy centered around one person, his daughter, Amara. He was a titan of industry, a man who could make or break fortunes with a single phone call. But his greatest treasure wasn't his skyscrapers or his fleet of cars. It was the girl in the picture he carried everywhere. Amara was 12 years old, and she was the sun around which the entire Andrews household revolved. She was an only child, born to her parents late in life after years of waiting and praying. Her laughter was the sweetest music that ever filled the halls of their mansion. It echoed off the marble floors and danced through the lush gardens. She had her father's kind eyes and her mother's gentle smile. To see her was to see joy in its purest form. She loved chasing butterflies in the garden, her small feet barely touching the grass. She loved sitting on her father's lap in his big leather chair, listening to his stories about the world. Most of all, she loved her mother's hugs, which felt like being wrapped in the safest, warmest blanket imaginable. Life for Amara was perfect, and then, one Tuesday afternoon, the sun went out. It was a day like any other. Amara had finished her lessons with her private tutor and went out to the garden to play, just as she always did. Her mother, watching from the veranda, smiled as she saw Amara chasing a vibrant blue butterfly near the large white gates of the estate. She turned away for just a moment to answer a phone call. When she looked back, the garden was empty. The butterfly was gone, and so was Amara. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her heart. She called Amara's name. The only answer was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. What followed was a blur of frantic, heart-wrenching chaos. Mr. Andrews rushed home, his powerful composure shattering the moment he saw his wife's terrified face. The police were called. Private detectives, the best in the country, were hired. The news spread like wildfire, first through the city, then across the nation. Billionaire's daughter vanishes. The headlines were everywhere. They spared no expense. They plastered Amara's smiling face on billboards, on television screens, in newspapers. They offered a reward so large it could make a poor man a king overnight. They followed every lead, no matter how small or strange. They interviewed every staff member, every friend, every distant relative. They even used international channels, hoping to find a trace of her beyond Nigeria's borders. But it was as if Amara had been swallowed by the earth. The trail was colder than a stone at the bottom of the ocean. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The hope that had once burned so fiercely began to flicker, dimming with every passing sunset that didn't bring their daughter home. After 3 long, agonizing years, they made a decision that felt like a betrayal to their own hearts. They held a symbolic burial. It was a quiet affair, attended only by close family and friends. They buried an empty casket in the family plot, a final heartbreaking admission that their little girl was gone. It was a way to find closure, they were told. But for Amara's mother, it was the beginning of the end. The symbolic burial didn't bring closure. For Amara's mother, it was like burying a part of her own soul. The light in her eyes, which had dimmed over the years, finally went out completely. She had waited so long for a child, and to have her stolen away was a cruelty her spirit could not endure. She began to fade. It started slowly. She stopped eating. Then she stopped speaking. She would spend her days in Amara's old room, holding on to a small worn teddy bear, her eyes fixed on a world only she could see. She was there, but she was also somewhere else, lost in a labyrinth of grief from which there was no escape. Mr. Andrews watched helpless as the love of his life slipped away from him. He brought in the best doctors, the most renowned specialists. They gave her medicines and therapies, but they couldn't heal a broken heart. Her body, weakened by sorrow, began to fail. Not long after the burial, she died peacefully in her sleep. The official cause of death was listed as complications from severe depression, but everyone who knew her knew the truth. She had died of a broken heart. She had simply willed herself to follow her daughter into the quiet darkness. Now, Mr. Andrews was truly alone. The two lights of his life had been extinguished. The grand mansion, once a home filled with laughter and love, became a morcelum of memories. The silence was deafening. It echoed in the empty halls, in the untouched garden, in the hollow chambers of his own heart. He shut himself off from the world. He stopped going to his office, delegating his vast business empire to his trusted advisors. He declined all invitations, refused all visitors. The titan of industry became a recluse, a ghost haunting the corridors of his own gilded cage. He would sit for hours in his study, staring at a portrait of his wife and daughter, the silence his only companion. The world outside moved on, but inside the walls of the Andrews estate, time stood still, frozen on the day the laughter died. Years passed. The sharp edges of Mr. Andrews' grief slowly began to soften, worn down by the relentless tide of time. The pain was still there, a constant dull ache in his chest, but it no longer consumed him whole. He was a man living in the shadows, but a tiny part of him, buried deep inside, still yearned for the light. And then, light walked into his life. Her name was Rodina. She was introduced to him at a charity gala he had been reluctantly persuaded to attend. Rodina was everything his late wife was not. Where his wife had been gentle and serene, Rodina was vibrant and full of fire. She was stunningly beautiful with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that could disarm armies. She was poised, elegant, and carried herself with an air of unshakable confidence. She approached him not with pity, but with a refreshing directness. She spoke to him about art, about politics, about the future. She didn't mention his loss, didn't walk on eggshells around his sorrow. She treated him not as a tragic figure, but as a man. For the first time in years, Mr. Andrews felt a flicker of something other than grief, a spark of interest. Rodina was ambitious and incredibly persuasive. She saw the broken billionaire not as a man to be pitied, but as a mountain to be conquered. She began to find her way into his tightly guarded inner circle. She would arrange to be at the same exclusive clubs, the same private viewings. She was persistent, but never pushy, a master of calculated charm. Slowly, carefully, she began to fill the silence in his life. She brought him books she thought he'd enjoy. She engaged him in spirited debates that made him feel alive again. She didn't try to replace his wife. Instead, she carved out a new space for herself in his world. Companionship blossomed, and from the ashes of that companionship, a fragile romance began to grow. She brought a semblance of life back into the old mansion. She wasn't his wife, and she wasn't Amara, But she was something. She was a presence, a warmth, a distraction from the ghosts of the past. After 3 years of this careful courtship, Mr. Andrews did something he never thought he would do again. He proposed. He was older, wearier, and still wounded. But Redina had managed to convince him that he deserved a second chance at happiness. The wedding was planned to be the event of the year in Lagos. It was to be a grand opulent affair, held at the exclusive Palm Grove Resort, a testament to the fact that Adabio Andrews was finally stepping back into the light. The invitations were sent, the finest champagne was ordered, and the high society of Lagos buzzed with anticipation. They were all ready to celebrate the return of the king. But they were celebrating a story whose most important chapter was yet to be written. Far away from the glittering world of billionaires and lavish weddings in a dusty, forgotten corner of the country, a girl was fighting to survive. She was 18 years old, but her eyes held the weariness of a lifetime. Her name was Amara. She hadn't died. She had been taken, yes, held captive for 2 long, terrifying years in a dark, damp room by people whose faces she could no longer clearly recall. But one night, a door had been left unlocked. A guard had fallen asleep, and she had run. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, until she collapsed in a town she didn't recognize, with no memory of how to get back home. The trauma had fractured her mind. She knew her name was Amara. She knew she had a family somewhere, a life that was different from this. But the details were like smoke slipping through her fingers whenever she tried to grasp them. She was left with fragments like pieces of a shattered mirror. The deep rumbling sound of her father's laugh, the feeling of her mother's soft hands stroking her hair, the image of a big white gate that stood at the entrance to a place that felt like home. For 6 years, she had lived on the streets. She was a beggar, a ghost that people walked past without a second glance. She learned to read the kindness and cruelty in strangers' eyes. She learned which rubbish bins were most likely to hold leftover food. She learned to sleep with one eye open to find shelter from the rain under market stalls. She survived on scraps, on the mercy of the few, and on the faint, flickering hope that one day she would find that big white gate again. Then one sweltering afternoon, fate intervened. She was begging near a bustling market, her voice a weak hoarse whisper. "Anything, please. God bless you." Most people ignored her, but her eyes, scanning the crowd, landed on a poster pasted to a wall. It was large, glossy, and out of place amidst the grime of the market. It was a wedding announcement. She saw the picture of the bride first, a beautiful woman with a triumphant smile, but it was the man next to her that made Amara's heart stop. He was older now. His hair was streaked with gray and his beard was fuller, but his eyes, she knew those eyes. They were the kindest eyes in the world. The face was etched with a sadness she didn't recognize. But it was him, the man from her memories, the man whose laugh she could still hear in her dreams. Her father. Amara froze, her entire body trembling. The sounds of the market faded away. The heat, the smells, the people, they all disappeared. There was only the poster. Her father, he was alive. He was here and he was getting married. A storm of emotions crashed over her. Joy, confusion, pain, and a fierce primal need to get to him. The memories, once so hazy, came rushing back with stunning clarity. The garden, the butterflies, the big white gate, her mother's face. It was all there. She wasn't just a beggar. She was Amara Andrews, and her father was waiting for her, driven by an instinct she hadn't felt in years. Amara tore the poster from the wall. Her hands shook as she smoothed out the crumpled paper. At the bottom, in elegant script, were the details. Palm Grove Resort, Saturday, 2:00 p.m. That was 2 days from now. And according to a signpost nearby, the city where the resort was located was over 100 kilometers away. She had no money, no food, and the only shoes she owned were worn-out slippers that were barely holding together. But none of that mattered. For the first time in 6 years, she had a destination. She had a purpose. She started walking. The journey was a grueling test of endurance. The sun beat down on her mercilessly. The road stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of hot tar that burned the soles of her feet. Hunger was a constant gnawing pain in her stomach. Thirst was a fire in her throat. She begged for water at small villages along the way, and sometimes a kind soul would offer her a piece of bread or some fruit. She slept in abandoned sheds and on the side of the road, clutching the precious wedding poster to her chest as if it were a holy relic. There were moments when her body screamed at her to stop, to give up. But then she would look at her father's face on the poster, and a fresh wave of determination would wash over her. She had survived 6 years in the wilderness. She could survive this. Finally, on the morning of the wedding, she arrived. Palm Grove Resort was an oasis of impossible luxury. Manicured lawns, sparkling fountains, and a sense of wealth so profound it was almost intimidating. It was everything her life was not. She stood at the magnificent gate, not her white gate, but a grand one nonetheless, feeling small and utterly out of place. She was weak from the journey, covered in dust, her clothes little more than rags. Her feet were bare and bleeding. In her hand, she clutched the now filthy and crumpled poster. 2 guards in crisp, starched uniforms stood sentry. They were built like mountains, their faces set in grim, unwelcoming lines. As Amara approached, they immediately moved to block her path. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" one of them barked, his eyes sweeping over her with open disgust. Amara's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, I need to get inside. This is a private event," the other guard said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Go and beg somewhere else. There's nothing for you here." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. She held up the poster, her hand trembling. "Please, this man, the one on this paper, he's my father. I know he is. I remember him. Please, you have to let me see him." The guards looked at the poster, then back at the ragged girl in front of them, and then they laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. "Your father?" the first guard sneered. "You think Mr. Adabio Andrews is your father? You must be crazy. Now get out of here before we make you." But Amara couldn't leave. She had come too far. She fell to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion and desperation. "Please," she sobbed. "I'm telling the truth. Just let me talk to him. He'll know me." "I know he will." The commotion was starting to attract attention. Guests in expensive cars were slowing down to stare at the pathetic scene at the gate. And it was then that a figure of pure elegance and fury emerged from the resort. It was the bride. Rudina, a vision in a white designer gown that must have cost a fortune, was surrounded by a small entourage of admirers. She was on her way to the grand entrance to greet some important guests when she noticed the disturbance at the gate. Her perfectly sculpted face, which had been beaming with triumph, twisted into a mask of rage. She marched over, her heels clicking angrily on the paved driveway. The guests and her friends followed, eager to see the drama unfold. "What is this?" she screeched, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is going on here? Who let this thing near my wedding?" Her eyes, cold and merciless, landed on the weeping girl on the ground. Amara looked up, her vision blurred by tears, and saw the beautiful woman from the poster towering over her. Summoning the last of her strength, Amara tried to explain, "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I know him. The man you're marrying. I just want to see my father." Before she could finish, Rodina snatched the crumpled poster from her hand. She glanced at it with contempt and then spat on the ground dangerously close to Amara's bare feet. "Your father." Rodina's laugh was even crueler than the guards. "You think you can just crawl out of the gutter and try to scam your way into a billionaire's wedding? You are filth. Do you hear me? Utter filth." The venom in her voice was shocking. The guests murmured amongst themselves, a mixture of fascination and discomfort on their faces. Amara flinched as if she had been struck. Rodina, however, was just getting started. She wanted to make an example of this street urchin who had dared to tarnish her perfect day. She turned to the two guards, her eyes blazing with a terrifying fire. "What are you waiting for?" she commanded. "I want her gone. Strip her, flog her, drag her out of here like the street dog she is." For a moment, even the hardened guards hesitated. This was extreme, even for them. But one look at Rodina's furious face told them she was not to be disobeyed. Before Amara could even process the command, before she could scramble to her feet and run, the guards grabbed her. One seized her by the hair, yanking her head back. The other began tearing at her already tattered clothes. The thin fabric ripped easily, exposing her frail, malnourished body. Amara screamed, a raw primal sound of terror and pain. "No, please stop. Somebody help me." The guards began to beat her. They slapped her face, kicked her sides. She curled into a ball on the ground, trying to protect herself, but the blows kept coming. Guests watched, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. Phones were discreetly pulled out, cameras recording the brutal spectacle, but no one moved to intervene. No one dared to cross the powerful bride on her wedding day. The world was a whirlwind of pain and humiliation. Amara's hope, which had carried her so far, was being beaten out of her with every blow. She was going to die here, at the gates of her father's new life, dismissed as nothing more than a piece of trash. And then, through the haze of pain, a voice cut through the air, clear and commanding. "Stop. Not another hit." The voice belonged to a woman who moved with an authority that instantly commanded respect. She was tall, elegant, and dressed in a chic, understated suit that spoke of a different kind of power. Not the flashy, desperate power of Rodina, but a deep, confident strength. This was Evelyn, Mr. Andrews' stepdaughter from his first wife's previous marriage. Though not his biological child, he had raised her as his own. Now a formidable billionaire in her own right, Evelyn was known for her sharp intellect, her composure, and her unwavering sense of justice. She had arrived just in time to witness the horrifying scene. She pushed through the crowd of onlookers, her face a mask of cold fury. "I said, stop." The guards, startled by her tone, froze mid-blow. They recognized Evelyn. Everyone in their world knew who she was. To defy her was to defy the Andrews family itself. Evelyn rushed toward the crumpled figure on the ground. She knelt, her expensive suit getting dusty, and gently reached out to touch the girl's shoulder. The girl flinched, then slowly looked up. Her face was bruised. swollen and wet with a mixture of tears and blood. As their eyes met, a gasp escaped Evelyn's lips. She stared, her mind racing, trying to place the familiar features hidden beneath the pain and grime. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the brow. It was impossible, but it was true. Amara, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Is it? Is it really you? Hearing her name spoken with such tenderness, with a flicker of recognition, was like a balm to Amara's wounded soul. She looked at the woman's face, and through the fog of her trauma, another memory surfaced. A kind older girl who used to read her stories, who always treated her with a gentle patience. Evelyn, Amara breathed, the name feeling foreign and familiar on her tongue. I remember you. A wave of emotion washed over Evelyn's face, shock, horror, and an overwhelming surge of protective love. My God, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. It's really you. We thought you were gone. She carefully began to help Amara sit up, wrapping her own jacket around the girl's exposed shoulders. Radina, who had been watching this exchange with growing panic, finally found her voice. Evelyn, what are you doing? You know this girl? She's a liar, a common thief trying to ruin my wedding. Evelyn slowly rose to her feet, her eyes locking onto Radina's. The look she gave the bride was so full of ice and contempt that Radina involuntarily took a step back. You will be silent, Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. Or I promise you, you will regret it for the rest of your life. The standoff was thick with tension. The guests held their breath. The bride, for the first time, looked utterly lost. The guards stood by, looking terrified. It was at that moment that another figure appeared, drawn from the main hall by the sudden, unnatural silence that had fallen over the entrance. It was the groom himself, Mr. Adabio Andrews. What is all this commotion? Mr. Andrews asked, his voice laced with irritation. Evelyn, what's going on? His eyes scanned the scene. The stunned guests, the terrified guards, his furious stepdaughter, and his pale, stammering bride-to-be. And then his gaze fell upon the small broken figure on the ground, wrapped in Evelyn's jacket. Time stopped. His breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. He saw past the dirt, the blood, the bruises. He saw the eyes he had seen every day in his dreams for 9 long years. He saw the daughter he had buried in an empty casket. Amara. The name was a choked whisper, a prayer he hadn't dared to speak aloud for so long. On the ground, Amara heard that voice, the deep rumbling voice from her most cherished memories. She turned her head slowly, her bruised face filled with a desperate, fragile hope. Daddy. The world shattered and then reformed in that single earth-shaking moment. The silence that followed was absolute deafening. Every guest, every guard, every bird in the trees seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Andrews took a stumbling step forward, then another. He didn't walk. He fell. He dropped to his knees on the hard pavement, right beside his long-lost child, oblivious to the cameras, the gasps, the horrified stare of his bride. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched her face, his fingers tracing the outline of her cheek as if to confirm she was real, that she wasn't another cruel phantom of his grief. You're alive, he wept, the words torn from the very depths of his soul. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperate strength, as if he could physically fuse her to him and never let her go again. My baby, my Amara, you're alive. He buried his face in her matted hair, and the sobs that racked his body with the sound of 9 years of unimaginable pain finally being released. Amara clung to him, her own tears soaking his expensive suit, the word "Daddy" repeating over and over like a mantra. The guests watched, stunned into utter disbelief. The fairy tale wedding had just turned into something far more real, far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. The story of the day was no longer the union of a billionaire and his beautiful bride. It was the resurrection of a ghost. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Andrews, with Evelyn's help, slowly got to his feet, pulling Amara up with him. He held her close, his arm a protective shield around her, and then he turned to face Rodina. The look in his eyes was a terrifying mixture of profound sorrow and a rage so deep it was chilling. All the love, all the trust he had placed in her, had curdled into ash. "You," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "You did this to my daughter." He didn't need an answer. The guilt was written all over her face. He turned to his head of security, his voice ringing with an authority no one had heard from him in years. "The wedding is off. Get everyone out now." Then, without another glance at the woman he was about to marry, he and Evelyn gently guided Amara away from the wreckage of the wedding and toward the car that would finally, after 9 long years, take her home. The journey back to the Andrews estate was a blur of surreal emotions. Amara sat huddled in the back of the Rolls-Royce between her father and Evelyn, wrapped in a warm cashmere blanket. She was still in shock, her body aching, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. Truly safe. Her father never let go of her hand. He just held it, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles, his eyes constantly looking at her, as if he was afraid she might vanish again if he blinked. Tears streamed silently down his face, but they were no longer tears of grief. They were tears of a miracle. When they arrived at the estate, the staff who had heard the news were gathered at the entrance, their faces a mixture of astonishment and joy. Many of them had been with the family for decades. They had known Amara as a little girl. To see her now alive was like witnessing a resurrection. Evelyn took charge with her usual quiet efficiency. A doctor was summoned immediately. A warm bath was drawn. The finest, softest clothes were laid out. Amara was gently led to a beautiful guest suite where she was cleaned. Her wounds were tended to, and she was given a warm, nourishing meal. She ate slowly, as if her body had forgotten how to accept proper food. Through it all, her father sat by her side, never leaving her. When she was finally tucked into a large, comfortable bed, he sat in a chair beside her, just watching her breathe. "Forgive me," he whispered into the quiet of the room, his voice thick with guilt. "Amara, my love, forgive me. I never stopped searching. I never gave up hope. Not really. Not in my heart." Amara, drifting in and out of a peaceful, pain-free sleep for the first time in memory, managed a small, weak smile. "I found you, Daddy," she murmured. "I knew I would." Those simple words were both a comfort and a dagger to his heart. While the Andrews family was cocooned in their emotional reunion, Rodina was left to face the humiliating fallout. The canceled wedding was the scandal of the decade. She was a laughingstock, her name and face plastered across every gossip blog and news site. She had flown so close to the sun, and her fall was spectacular. He retreated to the lavish apartment Mr. Andrews had provided for her. Her mind a toxic storm of rage and humiliation. She had been so close, so close to securing the life she believed she deserved, and it had all been ruined by a filthy street rat who had crawled out of the past. But Radina was not the type to accept defeat. She was a survivor, a schemer. Her grief quickly curdled into a burning desire for revenge. She called her closest friend, Brenda, a woman as ambitious and morally bankrupt as she was. "She ruined me," Rodina hissed into the phone, pacing her apartment like a caged animal. "That little brat ruined everything. But this isn't over. I will destroy her. I will make everyone believe she is a liar and a fraud. I will make him hate her." The plot was hatched in the dark heart of her fury. If she couldn't have the Andrews fortune, she would burn the entire kingdom to the ground. Rodina's revenge was swift and vicious. She knew she couldn't attack Mr. Andrews directly, so she aimed her poison at the most vulnerable target, Amara. With Brenda's help, she devised a plan to shred Amara's credibility and paint her as a manipulative scam artist. They paid a sleazy, down-on-his-luck journalist a hefty sum of money. Their instructions were simple: create a scandal. The journalist, who had no qualms about manufacturing stories for cash, got to work. Within 2 days, a new story hit the internet, and it spread like a virus. The centerpiece of the smear campaign was a grainy, secretly filmed video. It appeared to show Amara looking disheveled in a clandestine meeting with a much older, wealthy-looking man in a hotel lobby. The accompanying article was filled with salacious innuendo. It suggested that Amara was a known escort who preyed on rich men, and that this reunion with her father was her most audacious scam yet. It hinted that she and the man in the video were partners in crime. The story was designed to plant a seed of doubt. The public, who had been so captivated by Fairy Tale Return, began to whisper, "Is it possible she was gone for so long? Where has she been all these years?" The video does look suspicious. The whispers grew into a roar. The narrative began to shift. Was Amara Andrews a long-lost daughter or a cunning imposter? Back at the estate, the family was horrified. Amara, who was just beginning to feel safe, was devastated. She saw the headlines on a tablet and broke down completely. "They think I'm lying." She sobbed into Evelyn's arms. "They all hate me, Mr." Andrews was consumed by a protective rage. "I'll sue them all. I'll shut them down," he thundered. But Evelyn, ever the strategist, knew that a public war would only feed the scandal. "No," she said calmly, though her eyes were like chips of ice. "We don't fight them in the mud. We cut off the head of the snake." "Victor," she said, turning to her loyal and incredibly resourceful personal assistant, "find out who's behind this. I want a name. I want proof. And I want it yesterday." Victor, a man who could find a needle in a digital haystack, simply nodded on it. He and Evelyn worked with quiet, ruthless efficiency. They knew Rodina had to be behind it, but they needed undeniable proof. Victor started with the journalist who broke the story. He traced the man's financial records, his phone calls, his digital footprint. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Victor's investigation was a masterclass in modern intelligence gathering. He discovered a large untraceable payment made to the journalist's offshore account just hours before the story was published. A little more digging, and he connected that account to a shell corporation and the director of that shell corporation, Brenda Rodina's best friend. The next step was to dismantle the evidence. Victor analyzed the hotel video frame by frame. He quickly identified it as a deep fake, a clever but flawed forgery. The lighting was inconsistent, the shadows were wrong, and a flicker of digital artifacting around Amara's face gave it away. The man in the video was a stockbroker with no connection to Amara, and the original footage was from a public conference he had attended months ago. But they needed more than just technical proof. They needed a confession. Victor located the journalist holed up in a cheap hotel and paid him a visit. He didn't make threats. He simply laid out the evidence on the table. The bank statements, the phone records, the proof of the forged video. "Here's what's going to happen," Victor said, his tone calm and businesslike. "You can either face charges for fraud, defamation, and conspiracy, which will land you in prison for a very long time, or you can tell us everything, sign a full confession, and cooperate with us. Radina and Brenda will not protect you. We will." The journalist, seeing his entire world crumbling, broke down immediately. He confessed everything, detailing how Radina and Brenda had approached him, paid him, and provided him with the doctored video. With the signed confession and the irrefutable evidence in hand, Evelyn made her move. She didn't leak the information to the press. She called a press conference. Standing before a room packed with reporters, Evelyn was the picture of calm, controlled power. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the facts one after another with chilling precision. She showed the bank records. She played the expert analysis, debunking the video. And then she played a recording of the journalist's confession. The room was silent, then erupted into a frenzy of camera flashes and shouted questions. This was not a mistake, Evelyn concluded, her voice ringing with authority. This was a malicious, calculated attack on a young woman who has already endured more suffering than any of us can imagine. It was orchestrated by two people, Brenda Alaki and the woman who was almost a member of this family, Rodina Bello. The appropriate legal actions are already underway. The Andrews family will not be making any further comment. We only ask that you give Amara the privacy and peace she needs to heal. The story exploded. Radina's name was now synonymous with pure evil. Her public image was not just tarnished, it was obliterated. She was disgraced, exposed, and utterly defeated. It seemed like the nightmare was finally over. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. The news of Radina's public downfall sent shockwaves through the city. But for one person, it was a tremor that threatened to bring her own world crashing down. In a small, stuffy apartment, far from the glamour of Victoria Island, Naomi, Radina's younger sister, sat staring at her phone, her hands trembling. She had lived her entire life in Radina's shadow, a quiet, timid moon to her sister's blazing, destructive sun. She was a keeper of secrets, a silent accomplice to sins she barely understood, all out of a deep-seated fear of the woman she called family. But seeing the news reports, seeing the pain on Amara's face during the press conference, and knowing the truth was so much worse than what the world imagined. It had planted a seed of rebellion in her terrified heart. For days, that seed had been watered by guilt, and now it was breaking through the surface. Her conscience, so long suppressed, was screaming. With a shaking finger, she found the public number for Evelyn's corporate office. She almost hung up a dozen times, her heart hammering against her ribs. What if Radina found out? What would she do to her? But then, the image of a bruised Amara at the wedding gate flashed in her mind, and she pressed the call button. The call was answered by Victor. His voice was professional, crisp. Naomi, her own voice a choked whisper, refused to give her name. She only said she had urgent private information for Evelyn Andrews regarding her sister. Victor, trained to recognize the scent of a critical lead, didn't dismiss her. He handled the call with delicate care, assuring her she would be safe and arranged a discreet meeting. They met in a neutral, private conference room in a hotel, far from the prying eyes of the media. Evelyn was there alone, her presence calm and reassuring. She didn't push or demand. She simply poured Naomi a glass of water and waited. "Thank you for seeing me," Naomi began, her voice barely audible. She couldn't meet Evelyn's eyes, instead staring at her own twisting hands. I have to tell you something about my sister, about Redina." "Take your time," Evelyn said softly. Naomi took a shuddering breath. This thing she did, the fake video, it's not the worst of it. It's not even close. This started a long, long time ago. The words began to spill out, slow and painful, like pulling shards of glass from a deep wound. She spoke of Redina's obsession with Mr. Andrews, an ambition that had taken root years before she had even met him. He was a symbol, a prize to be won. But there were obstacles, Naomi whispered, finally looking up, her eyes swimming with tears. His wife and his daughter. She knew he would never leave them. Evelyn felt a cold dread creep up her spine, but her face remained a mask of calm. What did she do? Naomi? She wanted Amara out of the picture, Naomi sobbed, the confession tearing through her. She thought if the child was gone, the marriage would fall apart. That, in his grief, he would be vulnerable. She hired some men. She told me it was just to scare them, to take the girl for a little while and then let her go. I don't know if I believed her even then, but I was too scared to say anything. It was her. She orchestrated the kidnapping. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the horror of the revelation. The kidnapping wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was the opening move in a twisted, decadal-long game. Evelyn felt a wave of nausea, but she held it back. She had a feeling this wasn't the end. Naomi saw the look on her face and seemed to crumble further. But that's not all. She choked out. It gets worse. She explained that when the kidnapping didn't shatter the marriage, when it only drew Mr. Andrews and his wife closer in their shared agony, Redina became more desperate. She couldn't wait for grief to run its course. Naomi's voice dropped to a barely audible, horrifying whisper. She poisoned her. Mrs. Andrews. Evelyn froze, every muscle in her body tensing. It was slow, Naomi continued, rocking back and forth in her chair. Subtle, a rare, untraceable substance she got from a disgraced doctor. It made her weak, depressed. It attacked her heart. Everyone thought she died of grief. It was the perfect cover. But she was murdered. Miss Andrews, Redina murdered your stepmother to clear her path. The confession hung in the silent room, monstrous and absolute. Amara's disappearance, her mother's tragic death, Redina's perfectly timed arrival. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a cold, calculated, and profoundly evil plot. And the full terrifying scope of it was only now in this quiet hotel room, coming into the light. The confession from Naomi was the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. But Evelyn knew they needed more. They needed to corroborate the story. They needed to find the men Redina had hired. Naomi, in her confession, had given them another name. Moses. Moses, she explained, was Redina's ex-lover from years ago. A man from the darker side of the city, whom she had used to do her dirty work. He was the one who had made the arrangements for the kidnapping. He was her accomplice. Victor was once again dispatched. Finding Moses was harder than finding the journalist. He was a man who lived in the shadows with no digital footprint and a deep distrust of everyone. But Victor was relentless. He used his network of informants, called in old favors, and after 3 days of tireless searching, he located Moses in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. The confrontation was tense. Moses was a tough, street-hardened man, not easily intimidated. But Victor didn't come with threats. He came with an offer. "Naomi has told us everything," Victor said calmly, standing in the middle of Moses's sparse living room. "About the kidnapping, about the poison. The police are already building a case. Right now, you are looking at being a prime accomplice to kidnapping and murder. You will go to prison for the rest of your life." Moses's face remained a stony mask. "However," Victor continued, "you were used by her. We know that if you tell us everything you know, if you give us the evidence we need to put Rodina away for good, we can arrange for you to be a state witness. You'll still face charges, but with our help, your sentence will be significantly reduced. It's your only way out." He let the offer hang in the air. Moses stared at him, his mind working furiously. He knew Rodina. He knew she would throw him to the wolves without a second thought to save herself. Loyalty to her was a death sentence. He finally broke. With a heavy sigh, he began to talk. He confessed to everything. He described how Rodina, consumed by jealousy and ambition, had planned the kidnapping. He gave them the names of the 2 low-level thugs he had hired to carry it out. He explained how they were only supposed to hold Amara for a few weeks, but the media attention became so intense that they panicked and fled, abandoning the girl in a remote town. Most damningly, he confessed to helping Rodina dispose of the evidence related to the poisoning. He had been the one to get rid of the vials and the records from the disgraced doctor who had supplied the substance. He told them where the doctor could be found. It was all there, every piece of the puzzle. With the confessions of Naomi and Moses and the location of the doctor who supplied the poison, Victor had everything he needed. He turned all the evidence over to the police. The arrest was quiet but swift. Police officers arrived at Rodina's luxury apartment in the early hours of the morning. They found her sitting in the dark, surrounded by the expensive things she had acquired, looking like a queen who had lost her kingdom. When they told her she was under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and a list of other charges, she didn't even seem surprised. The fight had gone out of her. Her long, terrible game was finally over. The trial of Rodina Bello was the most sensational legal case the country had seen in years. The courtroom was packed every day with journalists, socialites, and ordinary people, all captivated by the story of the beautiful, deadly social climber. Rodina, stripped of her designer clothes and her confident swagger, looked small and pathetic in the defendant's box. Her defense team tried to paint her as a victim herself, a woman driven by a desperate need for love and a desire to escape her own troubled past. In her final statement to the court, she wept, her voice filled with a hollow, self-pitying sorrow. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she cried. "I just wanted to belong. I wanted a life that mattered. I just wanted him to love me." But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The testimonies of Naomi and Moses, the confession of the journalist, the financial records, the proof from the doctor who had supplied the poison. It all painted a picture of a cold, calculating predator, not a love-struck victim. The judge was unmoved by her tears. In delivering the sentence, her voice was stern and unwavering. "You speak of wanting love," the judge said, looking directly at Rodina, "but your actions were devoid of it. You preyed on a family's grief. You stole a child's life. You orchestrated the death of an innocent woman. This was not about love. It was about greed, ambition, and a chilling lack of humanity. Redina was found guilty on all initial charges: kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy, defamation, and obstruction of justice. The murder charge for Mrs. Andrews' death was still under investigation, pending further evidence, but the existing convictions were more than enough. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole. More charges, the judge noted, were likely to follow. In the courtroom, Mr. Andrews and Evelyn watched in silent relief. There was no joy, no sense of victory, just a profound, weary sadness and the quiet closing of a long, painful chapter. Brenda, Moses, and the others involved all faced their own separate legal battles, their lives ruined by their association with Redina's dark ambition. Justice had been delivered. The truth, after so many years in the dark, had finally come to light. With the trial over, a quiet peace began to settle over the Andrews estate. For Amara, the journey of healing was just beginning. The physical scars faded quickly, but the wounds on her soul ran deep. She started therapy with a kind, patient doctor who helped her navigate the labyrinth of her trauma. She began to slowly piece together the lost years, not with fear, but with a growing sense of strength. She had survived. That was the most important truth. She resumed her education, starting with tutors at home. Her mind, once starved of knowledge, was a thirsty sponge. She devoured books, asked endless questions, and rediscovered the joy of learning that had been stolen from her. Her bond with Evelyn deepened into something truly special. Evelyn was more than just a stepsister. She was a mentor, a protector, and her closest friend. She taught Amara about the world she had been cut off from. But more importantly, she taught her how to be strong, how to trust again, and how to find her own voice. They were two sides of the same coin, one who had fought the world from within the system, the other who had survived it from the outside. Together, they were whole. Mr. Andrews, for his part, dedicated himself to being the father he had almost lost the chance to be. He was patient, loving, and present. He listened to her, laughed with her, and simply cherished every moment he had with the daughter who had come back from the dead. The silence in the mansion was replaced once again, not with the loud laughter of a child, but with the quiet, steady hum of a family healing together. Inspired by their journey, Amara and Evelyn decided to create something positive from the ashes of their pain. They launched the Bright Seed Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping lost, abused, and forgotten girls across Nigeria. It was to be a beacon of hope, a place of refuge, and a promise that no girl would have to suffer in silence as Amara had. One quiet morning, months later, Amara was sitting under the large jacaranda tree in the garden, the same garden where she had been taken all those years ago. But it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of peace. She was writing in a leather-bound journal, her pen moving gracefully across the page. Evelyn walked up and sat beside her on the soft grass. "What are you writing?" she asked gently. Amara looked up, her face serene, her eyes clear and bright. A soft smile touched her lips. "My story," she said, her voice quiet but full of a strength that had been forged in fire. "I'm writing the story of a girl the world thought was gone, but who came back stronger." Evelyn put her arm around Amara's shoulders, and together they looked out at the sun-drenched garden. The past was a part of them, a story of pain and betrayal, But it no longer defined them. The future stretched out before them, quiet, honest, and filled with a hope that was as real and as bright as the morning sun. The girl who was lost had finally truly come.